Pixar Studios nearly single-handedly changed the landscape of animation. Over the course of a decade, beginning with Toy Story, the studio created a catalog of films that were unparalleled, both in terms of innovation and cinematic quality. For a time, the public face of the company, John Lasseter, was considered the new Walt Disney and projected an image of perfection and infallibility. Of course, Pixar would not be 100% bulletproof. Their track record, however, still speaks for itself against great scrutiny. In this video, we will look back at the history of Pixar, from its humble beginnings to becoming the frontrunner of computer animation in the film industry, and right through present day. We will also look behind the curtain of its family-friendly image that Pixar, along with Disney, their proprietors, operate under. In 1974, at the New York Institute of Technology, a computing lab called the Computer Graphics Lab was created. Founded by future employees of Microsoft, NVIDIA, and the co-creator of the open source initiative, two of its members included Edwin Catmull and Alvy Ray Smith, the future founders of Pixar. The group attracted the attention of then up-and-coming film director George Lucas, who offered everyone a job at his production company, Lucasfilm. By 1979, 6 members, including Catmull and Smith, were hired. The new hires at Lucasfilm's computer division would pioneer early CGI. The earliest example, the Genesis sequence from 1982's Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan. Though employed by Lucasfilm, Catmull and Smith secretly wanted to utilize this new computer technology to create an animated feature film. Around this time, a recent graduate of the California Institute of the Arts, or CalArts, named John Lasseter, joined Walt Disney Productions. Among those in his class were future A Bug's Life writer Joe Ranft and The Incredibles director Brad Bird. Lasseter worked on side projects of little note. However, he found inspiration when in 1982 he saw the Steve Leisberger directed feature film Tron. Upon seeing the then groundbreaking computerized special effects, Lasseter wanted to make an animated film using a similar process. After recruiting a group of friends and after reaching out to the aforementioned Ed Catmull, he attempted to make a fully CG animated film based on the Thomas Disch book The Brave Little Toaster, and pitched it to then Disney CEO Ron Miller. During the meeting, Miller rejected the project due to a lack of interest and for being perceived as a waste of money. Minutes after the meeting, John Lasseter was fired from Walt Disney Productions. The Brave Little Toaster would eventually be made by another studio as a 2D animated film, like every other animated film at the time. After being fired from Disney, John Lasseter was hired as a freelancer by Ed Catmull and later full-time at Lucasfilm by October of 1984. It was a very turbulent year for Lucasfilm. George Lucas had gone through a very public divorce in 1983, and with revenue from the Star Wars franchise slowly drying up following 1983's Return of the Jedi, everyone's jobs were on the line. Catmull, Smith, and Lasseter spent years wondering if their positions were going to be terminated, or if the entire computer division was going to be deemed unnecessary. To keep the team together, in February of 1986, Catmull and Smith started their own company. The company they created was Pixar, with Ed Catmull as its first president and Alvy Smith as its vice president. Everyone involved wished to create a CG animated movie. They realized, however, that it would take some time to do. For the time being, they became a hardware company, selling their branded Pixar Image computer to government agencies. Early on, Pixar had to look for investors to continue operating. They were turned down 45 times, until they eventually came across Apple founder and former CEO, the late Steve Jobs. Jobs, then the owner of computer company Next, and after being fired from Apple, paid George Lucas $5 million for the technology rights and invested another $5 million directly into the company. Jobs then joined Pixar as chairman of their board of directors. In order to increase sales of Pixar Image computers, the company made a series of animated shorts, such as the Oscar-nominated Luxo Jr. in 1986. These were the first steps toward the shared goal of an entirely computer-animated feature film. By 1991, the situation at Pixar had become grim, with layoffs reducing the total number of employees from 72 to 42. In another blow, co-founder and vice president Alvy Ray Smith quit the company after a heated fight with Steve Jobs over the use of a whiteboard. By this time, the only success the company had were their animated shorts. They would now try their hand at creating their first full-length animated feature film. This started to take shape when Lasseter's former classmate and friend Joe Ranft left Disney after working on Beauty and the Beast and The Lion King. Ranft was persuaded to join Pixar as their new head of story. Along with Ranft, other new employees would include future Finding Nemo director Andrew Stanton and Up director Pete Docter. More good news would emerge that year as Disney had taken an interest in the concept of computer animated films. Their Disney chairman, Jeffrey Katzenberg, gave Pixar a 3-movie deal worth $26 million. Unbeknownst to Pixar at the time, this deal was a lifesaver. Steve Jobs had been contemplating selling the company with Microsoft and Oracle as potential suitors. Pixar now had the talent and budget to create what seemed to be impossible merely a decade ago. As difficult as it may seem to believe, Toy Story was almost canceled by Disney. Chairman Jeffrey Katzenberg attempted to micromanage the project, tearing up scripts and plot suggestions and sending back mountains of notes with every meeting. Katzenberg wanted the lead characters to be edgier and more adult. Pixar wanted something more in line with classic Disney, something that Katzenberg didn't have in mind at all. Things came to a head on November 19, 1993, when Pixar decided to show Disney half of the finished film. Deemed Black Friday by everyone who witnessed it, the film was a mess. The hero came off more like a villain. Woody, voiced by Tom Hanks, was a tyrannical leader that all the other toys were fearful of. The characters and the story were much more cynical and darker than what we know in the final film. The entire concept was taking a dark tone that no one involved, besides Katzenberg, was on board with. Then president of Walt Disney Feature Animation Peter Schneider was so horrified he demanded production to be shut down immediately. Reportedly, Katzenberg turned to producer Thomas Schumacher and asked why the film was so terrible. Schumacher replied, "Because it's not their movie anymore." The film was shut down, however Lasseter was able to make a deal. Lasseter would get 2 weeks to rewrite the story. The entire company slaved over the film for those 2 weeks. In the end, the rewrite was deemed good enough and the project was restarted in March of 1994. The first fully computer animated film, Toy Story, was released on November 22, 1995 to massive fanfare. Critics could not love it enough, and it was a hit with audiences, grossing $373.6 million against a budget of only $30 million. Disney could not have been happier with the result. For the remainder of the decade, Pixar would make CG animated films for Disney, only now with much less interference. Hot off the success of Toy Story, Disney signed Pixar to a 5-picture deal. The second film in their 5-movie deal, A Bug's Life, had also been a commercial success, though not critically as well loved as Toy Story. By 1999, the relationship between Pixar and Disney hit a snag. The idea of a sequel to Toy Story was floated, and Disney was interested in a direct-to-video sequel. This did not please Pixar. Lasseter was personally horrified by the direct-to-video Disney film sequels throughout the 90s. Disney was going to make it with or without them. Lasseter, being protective of his creations, decided to take on the production despite the drawbacks of being a straight-to-video feature, and would not count it as one of their contracted productions. This, as it turns out, was just the beginning. The movie was nearly lost 2 months into production. An erroneous command line by an unknown culprit accidentally caused over 90% of the production files to be deleted from the main server. An oversight in the backup process also meant that a good portion of their work had not been saved as well. Fortunately, Galen Sussman, the supervising technical director on Toy Story 2, had a workstation at home that had most of the missing pieces they needed. Once everything was reassembled, they pushed forward. Disney was pleased with the results and decided that they were going to release the movie theatrically. However, there was another problem. Lasseter wasn't pleased with the direction of the film. With only 9 months until Disney's set release date, the decision was made to scrap the film and start over. The story was rewritten and the entire film was reanimated in time for release. Despite the difficult production, the movie proved to be a massive success, grossing $245.8 million at the box office. Some critics and fans even called it better than the first. Even with the film being a hit in theaters rather than straight to video, Eisner reportedly refused to count Toy Story 2 as part of the 5-picture deal with Pixar. Eisner allegedly believed that their contract called for original movies and not sequels to previous films. This would begin to strain their relationship. Pixar accounted for 50% of all profits, with Disney doing marketing and distribution. Disney, however, owned all the story and character rights. The studio finished the 5-film deal with 2003's Finding Nemo, yet another critically beloved and financially successful film. By this time, Pixar was starting to become more popular than Disney, which was finding itself increasingly in an animated rut following the Disney Renaissance of the 1990s. Pixar tried to negotiate another deal with Disney, one where the studio would only distribute the films, but it proved quite difficult. Pixar was dealing with the notoriously frugal then CEO of the Disney Corporation, Michael Eisner. Eisner refused to concede anything in the previous deal. Even the massive success of Finding Nemo and The Incredibles failed to sway him. Even Eisner's alleged personal distaste for Steve Jobs further complicated matters. In Eisner's opinion, Apple products enabled the piracy of Disney films. It would appear that the original deal between Disney and Pixar was extended from 2001 to 2004, while negotiations went on behind the scenes for a more permanent arrangement. In January of 2004, everything fell apart and events rapidly escalated. Since Disney owned the characters, they felt they could use them in movies without any involvement from Pixar. To this end, Eisner formed a new company called Circle 7 Animation. a studio dedicated to making direct-to-video sequels to Pixar properties. Both Jobs and Eisner vowed to never work with each other again and pursued other partners. Circle 7's first film was to be Toy Story 3. In the film, Buzz Lightyear is malfunctioning, and his fellow toys are attempting to fix him. The toy company that made him in Taipei has issued a recall, and Buzz is shipped out to be repaired. However, the toys are not being repaired, they're being destroyed, with a new replacement member of Star Command named Dax, designed by an elderly Asian man named Kagoi, which would replace Buzz. Woody and the gang then launch a rescue attempt to bring Buzz home. Then, in late 2005, an unexpected development changed everything. The nephew of the late Walt Disney, Roy Edward Disney, convinced nearly half of all Disney shareholders to denounce Eisner and demand his resignation. Tension had been building for decades. Eisner and his dealings with Pixar appeared to be the final straw. Michael Damon Eisner officially resigned as CEO of the Walt Disney Corporation on September 30th, 2005. He was quickly replaced with former president of ABC, Robert Allen Iger. Plans were drawn up for another deal, but Iger had his sights set on a bigger prize. In January of 2006, Disney purchased the entirety of Pixar Studios for $7.4 billion. As part of the sale, Ed Catmull would become president of Pixar. John Lasseter would be given the title of Chief Creative Officer of Pixar and Walt Disney Animation Studios. Steve Jobs would be given a seat on the Disney Board of Directors. With Pixar now officially a part of Disney, Circle 7 was now superfluous. Circle 7 employees were called into a meeting in the main office. The studio was being integrated into Disney Animation, and 136 of its 168 employees were now part of Disney Animation Studios. Everyone involved was now far more powerful than they ever imagined. In the coming years, that power would lead to problems of its own. Brenda Chapman had seemingly been everywhere in the animation industry. She had worked for Disney in the 90s as a writer on films such as Beauty and the Beast and The Lion King. Chapman had also worked as a director on the critically acclaimed The Prince of Egypt for DreamWorks Entertainment, a studio founded by Jeffrey Katzenberg. In 2003, she moved to Pixar and briefly worked on the 2005 film Cars. In 2006, Chapman pitched a film to the studio, a fairy tale centered on a princess in Scotland inspired by Hans Christian Andersen and the Brothers Grimm. The film, originally titled The Bear and the Bow, was announced in 2008, with Chapman directing. The release date was scheduled to be late 2011. The film in many ways had more in common with Disney animated films than Pixar. The project was quite personal to Chapman, who drew inspiration from the relationship she shared with a rebellious daughter. While Chapman was excited to work on the project, she eventually encountered resistance in the form of John Lasseter. At the time of the Disney merger, Lasseter had been a highly respected figure in the animation industry, having been with Pixar for 20 years. To the public, Lasseter was a happy-go-lucky, childlike genius who inspired millions. To those who worked with him, he ruled with an iron fist and was immune to criticism. Those perceived as being talented became the subject of Lasseter's envy. Any criticism leveled at him resulted in quick termination. Only those whom he had trained personally were not viewed negatively. Only two people could reason with him, Joe Ranft and Steve Jobs. By the time Brenda Chapman was working on her film, both were unavailable. Ranft had died in a car accident on August 16, 2005. And Steve Jobs was often not available due to his battle with a form of pancreatic cancer, from which he would pass away on October 5, 2011. By the time production on The Bear and the Bow began, now titled Brave, several influential figures at Disney had already felt his wrath. Animator Glenn Keane and producer and documentary director Don Hahn were pushed aside. Keane left the company in 2012, never having animated a single character since the merger. Hahn was demoted to producing Disney nature films and not funding animated projects. Lasseter's wrath extended beyond Pixar. Chris Sanders, co-writer and director of Lilo and Stitch, was removed from Disney Animation's Bolt after disagreeing with its creative officer. It was inevitable that Brenda Chapman would begin to spar with Lasseter over control for Brave. The exact details are unknown. However, Chapman later claimed she would pitch story ideas only to be rejected. She would then witness Lasseter pitch the same concept only to be approved. In October of 2010, Brenda Chapman was fired from the film and replaced with incredible story supervisor Mark Andrews. The release date for Brave was pushed back to June of 2012 to account for the new director. Upon release, it was a moderate hit, grossing $540.4 million against a budget of $185 million. Though not as ill-received as the previous year's Cars 2, Brave didn't live up to the quality of movies Pixar had been known for to that point. Some cracks in the armor were beginning to show. The events surrounding Brave would also yield collateral damage of its own. Pixar was in the planning stages of another animated film to be directed by Pixar sound designer Gary Rydstrom, titled Newt. Along with concept art, a Disney press release was issued with a synopsis of the film, which read, "What happens when the last remaining male and female blue-footed newts on the planet are forced together by science to save the species? And they can't stand each other." That's the problem facing Newt and Brooke, heroes of Newt, the Pixar film by 7-time Academy Award winner for sound Gary Rydstrom and director of Pixar's Oscar-nominated short Lifted. Newt and Brooke embark on a perilous, unpredictable adventure and discover that finding a mate never goes as planned, even when you only have one choice. Love, it turns out, is not a science. Actors William Shatner, Dabney Coleman, and Ben Stiller were all involved with the production of the film. Newt was originally scheduled to be released in the summer of 2011. However, it was delayed until the following year. With the release date of Brave moved to 2012, it would directly conflict with Newt. The release date for Newt was removed from the schedule, with no new release date given. Another problem that Newt faced was its similarity to another film, that being 20th Century Fox and Blue Sky's Rio. Sometime later, John Lasseter stated that the two films were similar in terms of plot. However, he didn't say whether or not this was the reason for the film's cancellation. With Newt dropped from the schedule, Disney went as far as to have Chief Archivist David Smith remove it from its A to Z encyclopedia. When director Gary Rydstrom left the project to direct Hawaiian Vacation, it suggested that the film was now stuck in limbo. Though John Lasseter had previously declined to comment, sources from within the studio did seem to confirm that Newt had been cancelled. Speaking to FastCompany.com, Pixar's Ed Catmull offered an explanation as to why Newt was cancelled. Newt was another unlikely idea that wasn't working. When we gave it to somebody new, Peter Docter, director of Up, he said, "I'll do it, but I have another idea altogether which I think is better." And we thought it was better too. That was the reason we didn't continue with Newt. Though the movie was seemingly scrubbed from Disney Pixar's history, references to the film do remain. In Toy Story 3, in Andy's bedroom, there is a road sign that visibly reads, "Newt Crossing." In Brave, the witch includes a newt as one of the ingredients to her potion. In 2009, just as problems were developing on Brave, another Pixar film was taking shape. Bob Peterson, co-director of the 2009 Oscar winner Up, had a simple premise. What if the asteroid had never hit Earth, and dinosaurs had evolved to become farmers and cowboys? With the title The Good Dinosaur revealed in April 2012, the film was initially targeted for a November 27, 2013 release. However, it was delayed until May 30, 2014. Media chatter started circulating that something wasn't quite right. However, it passed fairly quickly. By late summer of 2013, the entire production was stalled, and the aftermath proved to be a mess. Directors Bob Peterson and Bob Walker were removed from the film. Ratatouille animator Peter Sohn was now in charge and was unsure of how to proceed. Help would seem to arrive in the form of Toy Story 3 director Lee Unkrich, Samurai Jack writer Mark Andrews, and Lasseter himself. To the public, it was increasingly clear the film was in trouble. Pixar continued to claim everything was still fine. On September 30th, the release date was again pushed back, now to November 25th, 2015, the same date as Finding Dory. Pixar eventually admitted the story was not working, period, full stop. It was just not where it needed to be. In November, as a direct result of the delays, 67 employees were laid off. This after a subsidiary in Canada had been shut down that removed an additional 80 staff members. By August of 2014, former voice cast member John Lithgow mentioned in an interview that the entire film had been dismantled and reimagined from the ground up. The film had largely jettisoned the Western style for a more boy and his dog storyline. The Good Dinosaur premiered on November 25, 2015. Critically, while not hated, it wasn't particularly loved either. As of the making of this video, outside of the Cars films, it is the lowest rated Pixar film released. The box office didn't fare much better, grossing $332.2 million on a budget of $175 million. To date, it's the only Pixar animated film to be considered a financial failure. The Good Dinosaur was perceived as a significant setback following the release of another Pixar film in 2015, Inside Out. Similar to Brave and The Good Dinosaur, Toy Story 4 suffered in development. Announced in 2014, it was going to be directed by John Lasseter, a first since 2011. It was originally intended as a romantic comedy and not a continuation of the previous films. Scheduled for release on June 16, 2017, it had been repeatedly pushed back. First to 2018, then to its current release date, June 20, 2019. Adding further difficulty was the passing of the late Don Rickles in April 2017. Rickles hadn't recorded any dialogue for the film. Outtakes were used to avoid recasting his part. On July 14, 2017, Variety reported that John Lasseter had stepped down as director of Toy Story 4, claiming to be too busy running the animated studios for Disney. By November of 2017, Will McCormick and Rashida Jones were out as writers, with as much as 75% of the script they had written also being thrown out. Prior to leaving, the pair commented on working at Pixar, saying, "Women and people of color did not have an equal creative voice." Days later, the meaning of that statement became clear. On November 21st, 2017, John Lasseter took a 6-month leave of absence, citing years of missteps with staff in a memo. More serious accusations would emerge soon after. Dozens of staff, male and female, claimed Lasseter would frequently grab and forcibly kiss female employees. He would continuously comment about women's appearances, and similar accusations to Brenda Chapman's about story ideas presented by women, as well as the advancement of women in the company. Lasseter was also accused of being inebriated while working. Steve Jobs was reportedly so concerned regarding Lasseter's drinking habits that he firmly believed it would kill him. The situation deteriorated to the point where Lasseter reportedly had what were referred to as handlers to regulate and mitigate his behavior. News of these incidents reached Bob Iger, who was not pleased with this behavior. For a while, there was an attempt to keep Lasseter. By that summer, retaining him was no longer an option. On June 8, 2018, John Lasseter, the biggest icon in American animation, would leave the company by year's end, a promise he did keep. In his place was director Pete Docter, a Pixar veteran of 28 years and director of Monsters, Inc. and Inside Out. By January of 2019, Lasseter was heading another animation studio, this time Skydance Animation, a move that has led to countless complaints and controversy. In some ways, the image of Pixar was always a myth. Struggling like any other film studio, it only took far longer for the veneer to crack to realize this. Pixar were not infallible. They could have difficult productions, less than beloved films, and even failures. Much like the company itself, the image of its leader was largely a Hollywood-created fantasy. While some of the film problems were unrelated, a large number of them can be traced to John Lasseter. His rise, hubris, and fall from grace may serve as a warning for others. Ironically, his fall mirrors Michael Eisner, a man he never got along with. Many factors heavily damaged the careers of others, not least of which being Brenda Chapman. While he didn't personally sabotage The Good Dinosaur, the persistent rewrites did little to help it. A decade ago, Lasseter was looked upon with wonder and admiration. Now, his legacy is in tatters. The direction of Pixar in the immediate future will define the animation industry for years to come. For Pete Docter, it may prove difficult for him at the helm. In the end, it's likely for the best that John Lasseter no longer has any power at Pixar. What do you think? Did John Lasseter deserve to be let go? Have you seen or have any interest in Toy Story 4? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and if you like this video, why not subscribe and click the bell icon for all the latest content? And be sure to check out our other videos. And if you really like the channel, why not consider supporting us on Patreon? Patreon supporters get all kinds of bonus exclusives, and you can support the channel for as little as $1 a month. You can also check out our sister channel, Midnight's Edge After Dark, for live streams, discussions, and more. Stay tuned because another video is coming right up.